Welcome to our second episode of Unprecedented, only on Legal AF MTN. That's the new channel in collaboration with the Midas Touch Network. Take a minute, free subscribe, and get other people to join this journey as part of your own. Really appreciate Dina Doll for being here, my regular co-anchor here on this Unprecedented. What we're going to do on a weekly basis is kind of do a dive and an examination, an x-ray into everything that's going on at the United States Supreme Court. So first, court's open for session. They were issuing orders even before the first Monday in October, but they've had their first round of oral arguments, some that are critical. They have violated the cocktail party rule. They jumped right into guns and abortion in their first week. I mean, talk about MAGA knowing they've got the numbers and they think they can do anything. Like, why don't we just F with a woman's right to choose again? And while we're at it, why don't we take another case about guns? I went 30 years out of law school without having one gun case, and now you can't get through a term without this United States Supreme Court trying to expand in some way or try to. If they think they've gone too far, try to walk back a bit. They're still mucking around under the hood of gun rights and gun ownership here in America. Then we're going to talk about the second part of this segment. We're going to talk about the new ethical scandals brewing again. If it's a day of the week, it must be a justice is in trouble and another ethical scandal. We got one involving Alito and one involving Kavanaugh. And we're going to talk about what we can expect in the coming weeks before the United States Supreme Court. This can be really, really important. But first of all, let me welcome Dina. Dina, how are you?
Great. How are you doing? I know. I feel like we're doing this show just in time because it's unbelievable how much the Supreme Court is doing right now. Yeah. So it's like the week to week, we have so much to talk about. It's amazing.
Yeah. When we were doing it on Legal AF, we would pick it up here and there. When Ben and I put Legal AF together, we used to get excited during the Supreme Court terms. It gave us something to talk about. But it gets sort of lost, and we don't want it to be. We want people to come to Unprecedented on a regular basis to understand what's going on. So why don't you kick it off with what you picked up from the first round of oral arguments, including about ghost guns. You can explain what that is. And from the oral argument that you observed or heard, what do you think is going to happen? Is there 5 votes to support the Biden-Harris ban on unregulated, unlicensed, unregistered ghost guns that you make from a kit or with a 3D printer or not? And then we can talk about a decision related to abortion that, of course, went against a woman's right to choose.
Yeah, so it's interesting. With the Vanderstock, that was the case. Basically, you laid it out. The agency that governs firearms redefined firearm to include ghost gun kits, saying that manufacturers of ghost gun kits had to be registered just like any manufacturer of guns. And they were sued over this definition, saying that this was an overstep of the agency's authority. We've seen a lot of this with the Federal Society and Leonard Leo trying to limit what the government can do in order to enact our laws. So the hearing was interesting to the extent I think that Chief Justice Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett are going to side with the liberals to allow for the registration requirement to stand, which would mean that the ghost gun kits would be captured in the definition of firearms. Some of the interesting questions, Kavanaugh's question, I thought particularly interesting because he was worried about whether or not these manufacturers of ghost gun kits would maybe mistakenly break the law. They wouldn't realize that they were a gun manufacturer and would break the law. And he was so concerned about this. And as we know, as we talk about abortion all the time, the doctors are always worried in these really vague abortion law standards that Justice Kavanaugh created. They never know if giving a woman abortion is criminal or not, which he didn't care enough about because he overturned Roe. But in this case, he was very concerned whether or not the manufacturers of ghost gun kits were breaking the law. So I thought that was an interesting side note. But that they were trying to argue that they were hobbyists, that these ghost gun kits were hobbyists, and so they shouldn't be captured under gun manufacturers. But Chief Justice Roberts is like, isn't it really just drilling a hole? How is that hobbyist? The other argument, Justice Alito was like, aren't these kits, so the different parts, could maybe become anything, isn't the same thing as saying a pad of paper and a pencil is a grocery list, but Amy Coney Barrett was like, no, isn't it more like a HelloFresh grocery delivery kit where it's very clear all the ingredients are going to become a meal? So that's the takeaway, the Alitos and Kavanaughs being Alitos and Kavanaughs. But I think for people who care about gun safety in America, I do think the Supreme Court is going to allow ghost gun kit to be to be regulated as other other gun manufacturers.
Yeah, I agree with you. Look, they had 5 votes to block the ban. In other words, they had 5 votes already. That ban on ghost guns being unregistered has already been allowed to take effect, subject to this final oral argument on full briefing. And the 5 votes were Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson. So they had 5 votes going in. The question was, were they going to lose any votes for this full appeal issue? The answer to that, from my observation and yours, is no. Mm-hmm. Are they going to gain any votes? Gorsuch looks confused by his original position. I wouldn't be surprised if, knowing he's going to lose, he jumps over and it becomes a 6-3 decision. Kavanaugh's bought and paid. Gorsuch's too. Kavanaugh's bought and paid for by the NRA, and so that he doesn't give a crap about liability for kit manufacturers. He's just in the back pocket of the NRA, who spent $1.2 million to get him confirmed several years ago. Spent $1 million to get Gorsuch confirmed. Why do you think? Quid pro quo is right here. This is the agenda of the far right, and that's why they wanted their pretty boy Kavanaugh to get in. We'll talk about Kavanaugh later on. So I thought when Roberts is signaling to the other right wingers where he does it in a way. He does a withering, I call it the withering one-liner of John Roberts. He did it during the immunity debate, and he did it here. He stopped the advocate, I think it was Mr. Clement, and he said, let me get this straight. Your position is we can regulate the guns, but we can't regulate the kits that make the guns? That alone for me signaled, he was saying that to summarize his position, and also signal, I think, to some of the people on the far right that this is, you guys are going to come along with me on this one. This is ridiculous. I think it's 5-4, 6-3 in support of the ghost gun ban, but it's only a makeup call. It's just because they've so expanded the Second Amendment, really overcoming all the other amendments, and put public safety and people's lives at risk, that on occasion, to make it look like the thin veneer that they are balanced and they are fair, and they'll throw you a case like, oh, the guy who beat up his girlfriend and has a restraining order against her and shoots up guns in the air like it's the old timey times. Maybe he shouldn't own a gun. We'll give you that one. And ghost guns, where you get to print them at home or make them at home, you get all the parts. It takes you a minute to assemble them. Maybe we should have them registered, but it's just so they can point to those to distract you from the other cases that are so devastating to our society and our way of life. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, before the 2008 Heller decision, Justice Scalia wrote, there was not the idea that there was a personal right to bear arms under our Constitution. It's a relatively very recent idea and holding by the Supreme Court.
And then in the same breath, they held a case, on the same week, we got 2 bad decisions, one by the United States Supreme Court as the tone at the top, and one of the Georgia Supreme Court, ripping away once again a woman's right to choose, curtailing it severely. Now, women in Texas can die in an emergency room, and the doctor is not responsible to provide her with medical care, reproductive health care, or an abortion if it would save her life. The argument was that EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Act that the federal government uses, it was one of the things that Biden, told his agencies after the Dobbs decision, removed a woman's constitutional right to choose. He said, scour the Code of Federal Regulation, scour all of your agency rules and regulations. Come to me with how I, as the president, with an executive order or with regulations by you guys, how we can find ways for women to continue to have choice. And, the entity that's in charge of Medicare and Medicaid and federal funding at hospitals said, we got an idea. They have to comply with EMTALA for emergency medical procedures. Why don't we say that you have to, if as part of emergency provision of care, you have to give an abortion. You have to give an abortion even if Texas says it's illegal. And, we heard the arguments. They had a similar argument in Iowa. But now the Supreme Court was like, yeah, no. We'll get around to deciding that issue. But for now, you can't use EMTALA. We don't see it. And that's a bad sign. That means there were at least 5 people on that court that aren't going to allow this end run around to provide women a right to choose, right?
No, absolutely. They want their cake and eat it too, because they could just not provide that abortion, but then they would not receive the federal funding. But they want the federal funding and not to be able to provide the emergency care. So you're going to have one or the other, in my opinion. But the Supreme Court, as you say here, does not seem to be coming down the right side on this.
No. And Georgia's Supreme Court picked up the mantle, or the gauntlet, thrown down by the U.S. Supreme Court. And, we had about 3 days after Judge McBurney wrote that eloquent opinion finding within the Georgia Constitution the right of liberty and a right of privacy that enshrined a woman's right to choose. In a great opinion, but it lasted all of 3 days. Credit goes out to some of the abortion clinics and reproductive care clinics, because they did provide abortions in that 72-hour period, some up to 22 weeks. I think there was one in Georgia that went up to 22 weeks, which was the original number, as opposed to the 6-week ban, the Texas-like ban that Georgia adopted. These things matter. I mean, I don't want this to be a gloom and doom, event that we're doing every week on Legal AF MTN. What do you do about it? Well, the abortion is on the ballot in 10 states where you have the opportunity, including in Georgia, definitely in Florida, where you have the opportunity to vote, male and female or no gender at all, in favor of a woman's right to choose and enshrine it in your state constitution. If that and the fact that in 23 states, ever since Dobbs, a woman's right to choose has been effectively eliminated, making her a second-class citizen. So abortion, a woman's right to choose, and reproductive rights are on the ballot in November. And if that doesn't motivate our listeners and followers and others to go to the polls, I don't know what will.
Absolutely. And sometimes that's the comments I get is like, if the Supreme Court decides something, like, is that it? And not always, right? I mean, that they do decide the law, but you can change the law. And these states are going to change the law for their citizens if they get that passed in all the states in November.
But even if every state changes, even if in 23 states, they're not going to change the law. So we're talking about 27 states, less than that, because there's some states you don't have to change the law. Like New York, you're going to be able to get an abortion. That's not the problem. But in some other states, this is the strategy the Democrats have come up with, which is to try to find ways within the existing constitution of a state. For those that follow from around the world, every state in the union has its own constitution. It can give more rights than the federal constitution. It just can't take away rights that are in our federal constitution. If it wants to extend more rights, that's fine. It just can't do less. The bare minimum is what's in our federal U.S. Constitution. If you don't want a constitution in your state, you don't need one, but they all have one. It has to do with how this country got put together. But and a lot of states are very detailed. If you look at Florida's constitution, it looks like a code book. It's like pages and pages and pages of a constitution, not an elegant document at all. And it has so many rights. And because, for instance, in Florida, you have to get 60% of the vote to pass the amendment to the Constitution in Florida to give a woman a right to choose. 60%. It's a super majority, not 51. And hopefully that'll bring people out to vote. But that's why that looks that way. You want to talk about? Why don't you lead on the? We'll move to the scandal section of our hot take here. Talk about Kavanaugh, or if you want, why don't you lead with? Sounds like you want to lead with Alito, AOC, and Jamie Raskin. Tell our audience what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a special segment of this is going to be talk about the ethics, because the ethics violations on this court is massive. So in terms of, the New York Times did a reporting about, that's the other thing too. For years and years and years, we never really heard about the background discussions and dealings of the Supreme Court. But after Dobbs was leaked, there is a leaker and multiple leakers that are talking to the press, and the New York Times did a report talking to some of the insiders who said that Justice Alito was supposed to write the opinion in Fisher. And Fisher is the case that what was challenging whether or not the obstruction statute that was being used against January 6 defendants, including Trump, was valid. And Justice Alito was supposed to write that opinion, but after the New York Times reported on the flags that he was flying at his house that were in support of the Stop and Steal movement, which was directly at issue in this case, because the case had to do with the January 6 defendants, and the Stop the Steal movement had to do with the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. So according to the New York Times, when this reporting came out, Chief Justice Roberts removed Alito as the author of the opinion, but did not remove him from the case, did not require his recusal, or frankly, Justice Thomas's recusal, even though, as we know, his wife was very involved too in this election denial movement. So Representative Raskin and AOC sent a letter to Chief Justice Roberts asking him to explain how he knew enough to know that he shouldn't write the opinion, that the optics would be bad, or that he shouldn't lead the charge because he had a conflict, but yet didn't use that knowledge of his conflict to do the right thing and remove him, and how that is an ethical violation of the fact that as a justice, they are not supposed to have any conflict of interest in deciding a case. So they sent this letter this week. Chief Justice Roberts has not voluntarily, responded to anything that Congress has sent him before, but it's still important to have it on a document, have it in a letter. And, history sometimes is kind of like we are in the making of history, and laying out this evidence really of this letters, we will see if at some point they will have all of this evidence to be able to really enforce these ethical violations against the Chief Justice. But that's where we are on that issue. And as you say, there's a Kavanaugh, a huge thing on Kavanaugh that came out this week.
Before you go to Kavanaugh, let me bat it around a little bit with you on this one. I don't even understand what Roberts was trying to accomplish. Because he left him on, just because he didn't write the opinion doesn't mean he wasn't caucusing and he wasn't a part of the vote. And what about if he's an insurrectionist and his wife flew the flag of insurrection, Alito, at their two homes, including a 40-foot flagpole next to his car, which creates, let's just put it this way, an appearance of impropriety. If I was advocating at the U.S. Supreme Court on an issue related to the Jan 6 insurrectionist or Donald Trump, and as I rode by Alito's house, knowing, of course, he's one of 9, they always said, I saw the flag of insurrection, I would have a little bit of a doubt about whether I was getting a fair shake in that oral argument or not. And that's why you don't do it. And I don't want to hear about, well, the wives have First Amendment rights and they're their own people. No, if your husband's or wife is the United States Supreme Court justice, we need to be able to curtail, your public outbursts and appearances like Ginny Thomas and this wife of Alito. And so I don't even understand what it was trying to accomplish, because if he was tainted, if Alito was tainted, then he should have been taken off of all of the Trump issues, Fisher, the immunity decision, anything related to Jan 6th. That it should have been disqualified. But there weren't 8 people up there listening and caucusing and voting. There were 9. And so the fact that's why it's all a charade. And that's why that secret memo that got leaked, that's another part of this we'll be doing, leaking during the year. That secret memo that got leaked was so devastating because it ripped the mask off of Chief Justice Roberts. And that was all total bullshit, to remove him from the writing because it was in the wake of the flag issue. But that's not the only thing.
I mean, absolutely. I think it's worse. I think it's worse because he knew enough to do something about it, but so he just cared about the optics. He just cared about the way it looked. He shouldn't have had a vote with a conflict of interest, period. So Chief Justice Roberts, comes across as somebody who's supposed to care about the legacy of the Supreme Court, but that decision he made, he should be held accountable and should have to answer to that.
Let's move on to Kavanaugh.
Yes.
We knew parts of this at the time, that Kavanaugh's confirmation process was short-tracked by Mitch McConnell, that when 4,500, there was a hotline with 4,500 people that said they had information about Kavanaugh being a sex abuser at some point in his life as an adult. We had at least 3 people that stepped forward to testify. Well, only one did, Dr. Blasey Ford. There was another woman who, Rivera, last name, who was going to testify, but Mitch McConnell blocked her. And another man who was a roommate of Kavanaugh that was going to say that he saw him do these things. And none of them were allowed to take their place behind a microphone and testify. Only one was. And then the entire thing was short-tracked to, let's say, three days. Even Jeff Flake stood up and said, we need more time. There should be a full FBI investigation. But the reality is, based on this new reporting and this bombshell new report by Senator Whitehouse and the Judiciary Committee, Trump put the kibosh on any further investigation of Kavanaugh, although he told the public that he wanted a full and fair and transparent process. We know that's not true. What'd you pick up from the new reporting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know he lies. We know Trump lies. But, he talks about the weaponization of the government and going after his allies. I mean, he used the Justice Department to help his friend here because he told the American people that the FBI was going to do a full investigation and then told the FBI to not investigate and bury the evidence. And I can think of no bigger disservice to the American people when they are giving so much power to one person. This is a lifetime appointment. There's only 9 justices. The amount of power is immense. And to lie about it and to use your power to stop the investigation. We all knew that was happening, but now it's out in black and white. And it's a disservice to the American people, but frankly, it's also a disservice to Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, if as he says, he didn't do it, he should have been pushing for an investigation, right?
He didn't push for an investigation because he did it.
Yeah, he did it. And he will
I'm not buying the disservice to Kavanaugh part. That's the only part you and I jump off on that one.
I just think I'm at the framework where an investigation hurts everybody. Not having an investigation hurts everybody because, there will always be questions about the integrity of the process, period. And at the end of the day, people should have a right to be able to say their piece. Kavanaugh didn't even get investigated. Even the main people didn't get interviewed by the FBI, Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford. The failure of the process is massive. And yes, although I don't, think that Brett Kavanaugh, I believe that every defendant deserves, transparency. And it is just the damage to the Supreme Court, which is very important to all of our lives, is, massive when you don't even do the basics. And they didn't even do the basics here.
Alex Aronson, who's going to do regular hot takes with us and court accountability, he and I did one earlier today. That'll go up at some point. Alex was in the room. He was Senator Whitehouse's chief counsel. He was in the room for the Kavanaugh confirmation. He sat behind Senator Whitehouse, and he said, and he agreed with me. I said, look, I saw it from television. When Kavanaugh came out in that theatrical moment with his tears and his bluster and his all this, I thought he disqualified himself by not having judicial temperament in his reaction. I was like, oh, he's done. He's toast. But that was Mitch McConnell making sure that right after Blasey Ford, Kavanaugh came out with the crocodile tears and then cut off all other debate. I mean, all that the senators were given, they were given 1 hour to read 1,600 pages of unanalyzed, unsummarized, raw data from the FBI tip hotline. And then they were put up for a vote. there's a reason there was no process. The Republicans shortchanged America and insulted America and didn't think anybody would care or that they would get them confirmed. Once he's confirmed, it's almost impossible to get him off. But Kavanaugh lied to the American people during the confirmation process when he said he would respect Roe versus Wade as a super precedent. He lied to the American people about what happened at various points in his life, other than admitting that he likes my beer. I don't think that quite does it, Brett. And he lied to the American people because he's bought and paid for it by the gun lobby and consistently votes for the gun lobby over Americans' interest time and time again. And, I asked Alex Aronson for court accountability, what should we do? Because I never like to leave these hot takes with sort of the doom and gloom, Grim Reaper. What can we do? Why was it done and what can we do? And his comment was, as a society, we need to do this. That White House had promised Blasey Ford that she would not be forgotten for her, for what she went through, what she has gone through to come out against Brett Kavanaugh. So there's that. But hopefully, if there's a Congress that's put in place of Democrats, they can, with their subpoena power and their gavel power, they can look into what happened, reform the confirmation process and the investigation process, so this never happens again. I mean, that's what Congress in the hands of adults is supposed to be doing. The Oversight Committee, the Judiciary Committee, they're supposed to be fixing these things once the problem has been identified. Does it mean that Brett Kavanaugh is going to get impeached? Only if the Democrats take the House. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the one who did do the grilling and did the best job of showing what a farce it all was then Senator Harris. I mean, her questioning of him was exactly, I don't know how you felt, but listening to it, it was like exactly what I wanted to hear. It was so satisfying. The problem was the Democrats wasn't in the majority of that committee. So they were kind of ramrodded by the Republicans who used the lack of investigation as saying there was no corroborating evidence. But the Democrats knew at the time, and certainly, Vice President Harris at the time did the American people a service with her questioning of him.
And the American women were done a disservice by the Republicans who, do you remember who they used to question Blasey Ford? They brought in a female prosecutor, former female prosecutor, because the old white guys didn't like the optics, speaking of optics, of them questioning Blasey Ford, who gave very authentic and tearful testimony about being jumped by Kavanaugh, sexually assaulted by Kavanaugh. First time I asked this of Alex of court accountability. Can you ever remember the Republicans outsourcing their questioning of a witness at any time to this other person they brought in from some other place, this female prosecutor? I mean, he said no. So the whole thing, but this was the magic, the black magic, the dark arts of Mitch McConnell, the Federalist Society, Leonard Leo, and the rest, right? Mm-hmm. Leonard Leo picks the judges for Republicans like Trump. McConnell gets them confirmed, and then the gun lobby and other lobby groups like Big Oil and the rest, they have a friend indeed at the United States Supreme Court. We're going to be talking a lot on regularly once a week on Unprecedented, only here on the Legal AF MTN channel. Coming up in the next cases throughout the 2024-2025 term, they're going to be addressing environmental regulation again, presidential power again. They got another one or two abortion cases that are coming up on the docket. They've got, we haven't left affirmative action. Now they're going to say about the selection process or the admission process in secondary schools, whether in one particular case, it was, even though on the face of it, it seemed to be race neutral, was it being used to keep Asian Americans out of secondary school? They're not done touching every part of our lives while they've got the number 6-3 in their favor. And the thing you can do about it, if you want to see a court that's better balanced, if you want to see a court that's 5-4 the other direction, vote for Kamala Harris. Because if Donald Trump gets back in and gets 2 votes more, which historically is likely, it will be a generational change. It will be embedded in that Supreme Court for not 1, but 2 generations. I got a 3.5-month-old daughter. She'll be 30 before that's fixed. And that's scary. So what do? Go and vote in November, up and down the ballot, and vote blue. There's no other. That's it. If the only thing that motivates you is the Supreme Court, right? Don't boo, as Barack Obama famously said. Vote, and take friends with you and vote, and do everything you need to do to make sure your vote registers. Dina, it's always a pleasure to do this with you. You're going to be doing some regular hot takes with us here on Legal AF MTN as well. Take a minute, free subscribe. You're going to get great content like Unprecedented. Of course, we're talking about the United States Supreme Court. What else? Right here, Dina Doll and me. We'll be bringing in some guests as well. I'm doing an interview of J. Michael Ludick, Judge Ludick, tomorrow. It'll probably be up on the Midas Touch Network. We'll put it over here as well in clips over the week. And of course, we've got our new relationship in collaboration with Court Accountability, and bringing over people there, Lisa Graves, Mike Sachs, and Alex Aronson, to talk about the corruption at the federal justice system all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Where? Legal AF MTN. So until our next hot take and next Unprecedented, Dina Doll, Michael Popok, Legal AF MTN. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.